Today, we are undertaking an exploration of, I think, the absolute central tension of the modern era. It's how national security, emerging technology, and, our own personal privacy are converging.
And often in ways that are completely unexpected.
Exactly. The battlefront isn't some traditional line of engagement anymore. It's your local power station, it's the encryption on your bank account, and it's the data broker selling your location history.
That's absolutely right. And our sources today, they really paint a picture of extraordinary complexity. They show that this information war, it's not just some theoretical concept.
No.
It's operational. It's happening right now.
Hmm.
Our mission today is to try and synthesize these materials for you across three major and very interconnected fronts.
Okay.
First, we have the very real immediate cyber threats. We're talking about attacks aimed at destroying or disabling critical physical infrastructure.
Right.
Second, the monumental expansion of government and law enforcement surveillance and, the intense legal scrutiny that it's facing.
And the third.
And third, the U.S. government's most recent policy efforts to actively regulate and restrict the flow of sensitive U.S. data abroad to hostile state actors.
And just to give you a sense of how high the stakes really are here, we are going to be talking about Chinese state-sponsored hackers who are, right now, prepositioning themselves deep inside U.S. electric utility networks.
Just waiting.
Just waiting for a future signal. We'll also dissect this existential deadline that experts are calling Q-Day, which is basically the moment our current understanding of data security just evaporates.
Oof.
And finally, we will show you exactly how the location permissions you granted to some, seemingly innocent app on your phone are contributing to massive searchable government data pools. This is a lot.
It is a lot.
So let's just take a breath and unpack this piece by piece. So we have to start on the front lines, I think, focusing on this cyber warfare that bleeds over into actual physical sabotage. When we talk about foreign states targeting our energy grid, it feels like the clearest and most detailed playbook we have comes from the long, grinding conflict in Ukraine.
It really does. The sources confirmed that the Russian attacks on the Ukrainian power grid they're essentially a masterclass in modern hybrid warfare.
It's not just one thing, is it?
No, it's not just one enemy group trying one hack. They are coupling cyber attacks with kinetic strikes.
So a digital attack and a physical one at the same time.
Precisely. Think about the most extreme documented cases. We've seen instances where a successful cyber attack causing an initial blackout was timed perfectly to coincide with an air raid.
Wow.
So you're forcing the population into darkness while missiles are actively falling. It just compounds the terror, it disrupts rescue efforts. We even know of an attempt back in 2016 on Ukrainian grid equipment that was only averted because of a tiny technical misconfiguration in the hacker's own malware.
So they got lucky.
Incredibly lucky. Had that one little failure not occurred, the outages could have lasted for weeks.
That raises a really critical question about our own structural resilience here in the United States. Our grid is massive, it's interconnected, and let's be honest, it's very old in places. How vulnerable are we to that kind of sustained, coordinated attack?
Well, our grid is complicated, which is, both a strength and a weakness.
Right.
Unlike a centralized national system, the U.S. system is structurally decentralized. It's divided into distinct regional interconnections. You have the Eastern interconnection, the Western, and then
Texas.
Texas, which famously runs its own system, largely avoiding federal regulation for decades.
So there are these three big islands.
Three big islands, and within them, you have thousands of different utility companies that all have to communicate and work together, following standards set by entities like NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation.
So if a localized attack like the ones we've seen in Ukraine happens here, the immediate thinking is that the damage wouldn't just, instantly ripple across the entire continent.
Correct. The current security assessment, and this is based on the localized success of those specific Ukrainian attacks, it suggests that causing a truly massive, catastrophic blackout across an entire region of the U.S.
Like the entire eastern seaboard.
Yeah, knocking out the entire eastern seaboard for a month, say. That would be incredible. It's calculated infiltration. They have gained deep access to electric utility networks across the entire country. And I mean across the entire country, active in various states and regions all at the same time.
And their goal isn't what we normally think of, like theft or ransomware.
Not at all. It is prepositioning. They're essentially burying digital landmines in the critical systems that control the physical machinery, the industrial control systems, or ICS, and the SCADA systems.
And by prepositioning, you mean they've already compromised the systems and they're just sitting there waiting for some kind of geopolitical signal.
Precisely. They are waiting for a date in the future when they might simultaneously activate their malware and initiate blackouts or system failures across many different areas at once.
And the geopolitical context here as well, it's impossible to ignore.
It really is. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has explicitly tasked his military with being ready for a Taiwan invasion by 2027. If an invasion were to happen, causing debilitating, multi-regional power outages in the U.S. would be a massive tactical advantage for China.
It would completely tie our hands.
It would dilute U.S. military resources, it would cripple logistics, and it would create so much domestic chaos that it would preempt any large-scale U.S. response. The prepositioning of Volt Typhoon is a stark indicator that this is a core component of their future military strategy.
That is just a staggering reality to think about. State actors literally hiding in our infrastructure, just waiting for a clock to strike 2027. But technology creates a second threat. This one is potentially more universal, less geographically contained, and it's the potential total collapse of cryptography.
Yes. Q-Day.
Q-Day.
This is the existential risk posed by quantum computing. And I want to be clear, this is not science fiction anymore. Q-Day is the point in the near future where a sufficiently powerful, error-corrected quantum computer becomes capable of efficiently running algorithms.
Specifically Shor's algorithm.
Specifically Shor's algorithm. That can break the foundational asymmetric cryptographic systems that our entire society relies on for trust, for security, for digital identity.
Okay, so for anyone listening who hasn't really dug into this, can we just briefly explain the difference between the two main types of crypto that would fail?
Of course. We rely primarily on two types. You have symmetric cryptography, which uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt data. It's very fast, and it's generally believed to be safe from quantum attacks as long as the keys are long enough.
Okay, so that's the safe one.
For now. The problem lies with asymmetric cryptography, or what's called public key cryptography.
This is what we use every day.
Every single day. It uses mathematically related but different keys for encryption and decryption. This is the absolute bedrock of secure communication online. It secures everything from your banking login to digital signatures. Shor's algorithm specifically targets the hard math problems, like factoring huge numbers, that make asymmetric crypto secure.
So if that math breaks...
the entire system collapses.
And unlike the Y2K bug, where we knew the exact deadline, January 1st, 2000 here, the timing is just completely opaque.
And that uncertainty is what's so terrifying. An adversary building a quantum computer knows when they'll have it ready for operation, but the U.S. government and the private sector, we don't.
Which introduces this concept of harvest now, decrypt later.
Exactly. We don't know if a hostile state has already secretly achieved quantum supremacy. We just don't. And they could be simply hoovering up all the encrypted data passing through the internet right now.
Encrypted secret documents, intelligence reports.
Corporate intellectual property, all of it. With the intent of decrypting it all instantly when their quantum machine is finally operational.
So what are the concrete consequences if encryption breaks? I mean, it sounds abstract, but it really affects the structural integrity of everything.
The failures are twofold, and they're catastrophic. First, you have the inability to keep secrets. If asymmetric encryption fails, all stored secrets, every encrypted document, every email, every private conversation that's secured by public keys, it all becomes instantaneously accessible.
So decades of sensitive government records just open.
Open. Every company's IP. And second, you have the inability to manage system access. If the control systems that rely on digital certificates and authentication are broken, adversaries could gain unauthorized control of all digital systems that manage our critical infrastructure.
I can't even.
Imagine a failure of digital signatures. Financial transactions could be forged instantly, paralyzing global markets. Imagine that same access failure applied to the power grid or air traffic control. The societal trust that's required to operate these systems, it vanishes overnight.
Fortunately, there is a path toward mitigation, right? Even if the adoption is slow.
Yes. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, they've been working to standardize new post-quantum cryptography, or PQC, systems.
And these rely on different math problems.
Exactly. More complex mathematical problems that we don't think quantum computers can solve easily. And companies like Google and encrypted messaging services like Signal, they've been very aggressive about switching to these PQC algorithms.
But that's not everyone.
Not even close. And that's the massive, troubling hurdle. It's just how many legacy systems aren't making that switch, particularly in, mid-sized critical infrastructure firms, older government systems, financial institutions, leaving these vast, tempting reservoirs of data accessible for when Q day eventually arrives.
So moving from the sort of certainty of mathematics to the uncertainty of trust, there's another equally insidious threat. And that's AI's ability to just erase our foundational confidence in what is real. I'm talking about the rise of ubiquitous deepfakes.
This is a genuine societal reality shift. Historically, our defense against scams, like a phishing email, was pattern recognition.
Does the language look weird? Is the address spelled correctly?
Exactly.
What?
But when the fakes become technically flawless, when a voice clone of your CEO asks the accounting department to transfer funds immediately and it sounds exactly like them, mimicking their cadence perfectly, those traditional safeguards completely fail.
And the old advice, if you can't trust the email, hop on a video call, that's now moot.
It's totally moot because the video call itself can be fabricated seamlessly in real time.
So if the technology fails us, we have to fall back on purely human, non-digital solutions.
We have to. We desperately need new protocols, and they need to be complex and unique to human interaction. They have to rely on information that's just difficult for a deep learning model to access or fabricate convincingly.
So what does that look like?
It means moving beyond generic challenges. We're talking about things like complex, prearranged secret code words, or maybe a two-part human challenge. You verify the code word, and then you ask the person to recall a highly specific, low-stakes detail from the last private conversation you had with them.
Something an AI wouldn't have access to.
Exactly. Something the AI wouldn't have access to unless it had already compromised the entirety of your private messaging history.
The ultimate goal of all these threats, whether it's Volt Typhoon or Q-Day, is disruption or paralysis of centralized services. So what can citizens do right now to maintain some semblance of communication and resilience if that centralized infrastructure fails?
Well, the answer lies in decentralized mesh networks. And the prime example of this right now is Meshtastic.
Meshtastic.
It's a brilliant, open-source, peer-to-peer, radio-based mesh network. Unlike your phone, which relies on a single, expensive centralized cell tower, Meshtastic devices communicate directly with each other.
Using radio.
Using long-range radio technology, specifically LoRa, which is low power and very efficient.
So what kind of practical functionality does it offer, and what makes it so resilient?
It's designed for resilience, not speed. It uses that long-range radio to send encrypted, low-bandwidth messages. So we're talking short texts and GPS coordinates.
Okay.
And while the range for a single radio connection might only be, say, 200 meters in a dense urban environment, the strength is its mesh nature. The more radios connected, the more powerful the network becomes.
So it hops from device to device.
Exactly. If your
Yes.
message is for someone 5 kilometers away, it can hop peer-to-peer across 25 devices until it reaches its intended recipient and requires no cellular service or Wi-Fi.
So it becomes indispensable in two critical scenarios. Natural disasters, when cell lines are often the first thing to fail.
Or in areas of conflict where communication infrastructure is deliberately targeted.
Right.
Exactly. It represents a potential first step in building a local, self-healing communication system that could survive a larger disruption of traditional centralized services. It's a concept that shifts resilience away from large corporations and back to the local community. And if we connect this whole conversation to the bigger picture, we see that this reliance on centralized systems, which are the primary targets for foreign hackers, is simultaneously the most powerful tool for domestic law enforcement and intelligence gathering.
It's a double-edged sword.
A huge one.
Yeah.
Surveillance today is highly multifaceted. It's blending these new advanced AI-powered tools with established, massive-scale data collection methods that essentially view the entire population as a potential searchable source of information.
Okay, let's look at the primary tools law enforcement is leveraging, starting with one of the most visible and I'd say controversial, facial recognition technology, or FRT.
Law enforcement agencies have technically had access to FRT for about 20 years, but they were relying on early, much less accurate versions.
But the technology now is, as the sources repeatedly stress, very real.
Oh, it's very real and highly accurate.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen its capabilities demonstrated in high-profile contexts, identifying individuals involved in civil unrest, like the George Floyd protests, and also those involved in the U.S. Capitol attack.
And historically, the databases for this stuff, they just relied on government-held images, right? Mugshots, driver's licenses.
That's right. Mugshots, licenses, passport photos. But the databases have undergone a massive structural expansion, and they're now pulling in commercial data.
And this shift is just monumental.
It really is. Consider the case of Clearview AI. That company scraped more than 10 billion public images from popular publicly accessible websites and social media platforms.
10 billion.
Facebook, YouTube, even payment apps like Venmo. And the practical result of that scale is staggering. There is now a probability far greater than 50% that any American is already included in a database that is accessible to or leveraged by law enforcement agencies.
Which dramatically expands the scope of the surveillance dragnet beyond just people who have previously interacted with the justice system.
To basically everyone.
And surveillance is rapidly moving beyond just the face. When the face is obscured, what do they look at next?
They look at the unique pattern of your movement. We're seeing the emergence of gait recognition technology.
Your walk.
Your walk. This uses machine learning models to analyze unique walking patterns. How your feet strike the ground, the swing of your arms, your overall posture, which remains pretty consistent even if your face is covered.
So it's another biometric identifier.
Exactly. It's an emerging capability that addresses the problem of obscured faces in surveillance footage. Experts are also tracking the development of emotional detection technology, which attempts to analyze microexpressions or vocal inflections to establish a person's intent or state of mind.
But that sounds really unreliable.
And it is. Nearly all our sources agree that emotional detection is highly unreliable, it's immature, and it's prone to severe racial and gender bias. So much so that many experts are calling for its preemptive ban due to its inaccuracy and its potential for misuse.
So beyond the individual, law enforcement is using tools that monitor the entire flow of traffic. I'm talking about automatic license plate readers, ALPRs. This is just pure, bulk, localized data collection.
ALPRs are a core component of dragnet surveillance. These are high-speed cameras, often mounted on police cars, light poles, or freeway gantries, and they're capable of capturing thousands of license plates per minute.
And they record more than just the plate, right?
Crucially, yes. They record 3 data points: the plate image, the vehicle image, and the exact GPS coordinates, date, and time. This data is then aggregated into massive regional or even national databases, and it's stored for years.
So police can then search these databases retroactively.
Looking for vehicles near a crime scene, or trying to track the path of a suspect over time.
And this data isn't just police-owned. It's really a public-private partnership in surveillance.
Absolutely. The data collected by law enforcement ALPRs is frequently supplemented by data collected by private companies, like the ones used by repossession agents or parking enforcement, who also run their own ALPRs.
So they combine the data sets.
By combining these massive private and public data sets, law enforcement can build an extremely detailed map of vehicle distribution and identify a driver's typical travel patterns, where they commute, and often they can infer where you live based on where your vehicle is consistently parked overnight.
Now let's talk about the data streams generated by our own personal devices, which feed this digital dragnet directly from our pockets.
The location data generated by mobile phones and the subsequent data broker ecosystem are just staggering in scale. Law enforcement agencies make tens of thousands of requests annually for cell phone location data.
Tens of thousands.
To give you some context, a single major provider, Verizon, received over 13,000 warrants just for historical location data in the second half of 2020 alone. This is massive volume.
And how do they use that data in a practical sense?
They use techniques like geofencing, which relies on these reverse search warrants. Instead of asking, where was subject A, they ask the provider, give us a list of all devices that pinged cell tower X between 2:00 p.m. and 3:00 p.m. on Tuesday.
So they cast a wide net.
A very wide net.
Yeah.
This technique places all identified devices within a specific geographic area near a crime scene or a place of interest. The goal is to narrow down the list of potential suspects or witnesses from that larger group.
And then there are the device extraction tools.
Yes. Over 2,000 law enforcement agencies across the country have invested in what's called mobile digital forensics technologies, or cell phone extraction tools. These allow them to just dump the entire contents of a device.
Everything.
Location histories, messages, photos, everything. Even if the device is locked. The sources indicate that these agencies have performed tens of thousands of these extractions, often inferring location and other intimate data, and concerningly, often doing so without a traditional individualized search warrant.
And all of this is just amplified exponentially by the data brokers who are building these complete complex dossiers on every single one of us.
Data brokers are really the invisible foundation of the entire surveillance economy. They aggressively collect information from nearly every public and digital interaction you have.
Web browsing, social media.
Web browsing history, cookie tracking, social media activity, loyalty cards, purchases, even those personality quizzes you take online. They fuse all of that with public records, DMV, voter registration, birth certificates, court filings.
And the resulting profiles
Are comprehensive. They include your name, address, phone number, income, your social security number, marital status, profession, and highly granular life attributes, like whether you're a new parent, a recent cancer survivor, or a gun owner.
The terrifying implication here is that authorities can often skip the whole warrant process and just purchase these intimate details.
They certainly can. Law enforcement can approach this data in two ways. They can start with a specific person of interest and purchase the data broker profile to flesh out their life details. Or, increasingly, they can start with a generalized reverse search.
What does that look like?
They might search for anyone who lives in a specific neighborhood and search for specific keywords and visited a specific IP address at a specific time.
And even though the advertising data is often claimed to be anonymized,
Especially when location data is involved, the precision of that data in a geofence context makes it nearly trivial for law enforcement to tie that supposedly anonymized advertising behavior back to a specific physical device and thus a real person.
so what does this all mean for you, the listener? If the data is this pervasive, we really need some kind of operational security protocol for navigating this world.
Personal operational security, or OPSEC, it's no longer optional. It's essential, especially in high-risk environments like protests or sensitive meetings. The most effective safeguard against your personal data being used against you is physical separation.
Leave your phone at home.
Leave your phone at home. If you are attending a protest, the location data alone can put you on a geofence list.
And if leaving it at home is simply not feasible,
Then you need physical mitigation. Placing your phone in a Faraday bag, that's a pouch lined with conductive material, will block all incoming and outgoing radio signals. It essentially makes it invisible to cell towers and remote tracking while it's inside the bag.
and you should also disable biometric phone access.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Disable things like facial recognition or fingerprint scanners and rely exclusively on a complex code instead.
And why is switching from biometrics to a code so strategic?
It creates a legal shield for you. Under the Fifth Amendment, you cannot be compelled to reveal knowledge, such as a password or a code. However, biometrics are generally not considered testimonial evidence in the same way.
So police can force you to use your face or finger.
They can often compel you to unlock your phone using your finger or face. If you use a code, you can assert your right to silence and claim you simply don't remember the code, which prevents that forced access to the device's contents.
And for all forms of digital communication.
Use end-to-end encrypted messaging services like Signal whenever possible. They make it far more difficult for service providers or government interception programs to read the content of your messages. And finally, you have to maintain a state of perpetual awareness regarding social media.
Assume everything you post might be seen.
Assume everything you post, every photo, every comment, might be viewed by law enforcement. Check your sharing settings rigorously. Avoid capturing the faces of others in sensitive situations, and always consider your personal risk factors, especially if you belong to a minority group or have sensitive immigration status, as surveillance disproportionately targets these populations. This deep dive into law enforcement access brings us to a really critical legal threshold. And it raises an important question.
Which is?
When private companies are collecting these vast amounts of intimate data, from Clearview's 10 billion images to a data broker's real-time financial history, and then they're selling it or sharing it with law enforcement, at what point does that ubiquitous private data collection become a government action?
And therefore subject to constitutional constraints.
Exactly. That distinction is the entire ballgame, because the Fourth Amendment protects citizens only against unreasonable searches and seizures conducted by the government. If a private party does it on their own, that constitutional protection doesn't apply.
Unless that private party is acting as an agent of the state.
Precisely. The core legal test hinges on whether the private party acted as an instrument or agent of the government. And this is a highly factual determination, resolved based on all the circumstances of the search.
And the courts look at two main factors.
Primarily two critical factors. First, did the government know of and acquiesce in the intrusive conduct? And second, and this is key, did the private party perform the search intending primarily to assist law enforcement or simply to further its own commercial ends?
Can we just run a quick hypothetical to illustrate that tension?
Of course. Let's imagine a data broker. We'll call them Data Corp. And they routinely scrape billions of images. That's their commercial end. If the FBI approaches Data Corp and says, we need you to run a query on this specific individual in your existing archive, that is likely Data Corp furthering its own commercial end, even if the government benefits.
Okay.
Now imagine the FBI approaches Data Corp and asks them to specifically deploy new cameras at a protest site and collect data exclusively for the FBI's use in exchange for a fee.
Ah, now they're working for the government.
In that case, Data Corp is acting with the intent to assist law enforcement, and that search suddenly crosses the line into government action, subject to the Fourth Amendment. And the sources suggest that in many modern cases, especially where the government is just routinely buying or demanding the fruits of these private searches, that instrument or agent hurdle should be considered much easier to clear than it was, say, 30 years ago.
That sets up the next challenge, which is defining what even constitutes a search in the digital age. I mean, does accessing a massive database of already collected, anonymized data even count as a search?
The Supreme Court has been grappling with this for over a decade. Landmark decisions in cases like Riley v. California, which was about searching phones during an arrest, and Carpenter v. United States.
That was about cell site location data.
Right. Those cases established a new constitutional standard. The court found that due to their immense storage capacity and the intimate, detailed, and revealing nature of the data on modern cell phones, that data requires robust Fourth Amendment protection.
So it's the sheer volume and the detail that transforms the nature of the collection.
Precisely. Most big data surveillance programs today qualify as constitutional searches because they gather information that, in the aggregate, paints these vivid and revealing pictures of our lives, our politics, our private medical issues, our travel patterns, our relationships. It's the programmatic aggregation of data that makes it so revealing.
And this leads directly to the concept you brought up earlier, panvasive surveillance.
Yes. Panvasive surveillance, that is, the widespread programmatic deployment and use of technology capable of compiling detailed location records, like network cameras or the tracking built into many cell phone apps, that likely constitutes a Fourth Amendment search.
Because it violates any reasonable expectation of privacy.
Exactly. Because the data, taken together over time, documents intimate details about individuals' lives in a way a single observation never could.
You also mentioned the legal difference between discrete and networked surveillance, which is a key distinction when it comes to implied consent.
That's a crucial point. If you walk past a single security camera at a bank, you may be considered to have given implied consent because the surveillance is limited in scope and duration.
Right.
However, when those cameras are linked into vast, powerful networks that aggregate and store images for systematic searching, often integrated with FRT, they fundamentally infringe on reasonable expectations of privacy. The act of networking these systems shifts the activity squarely into the realm of an unreasonable search because the data is being retained and searched and correlated long after you've left the premises.
This entire legal framework, it seems to hinge on the cooperation or the resistance from the tech giants themselves. So how cooperative are companies like Google and Meta when law enforcement comes calling for data?
They are unambiguously the go-to source for law enforcement. We see this in the metrics. Google, for instance, responded to over 10,000 geofence requests in 2020 alone. And cell phone providers receive thousands of requests yearly for what are called tower dumps requests, for documentation of all users within proximity to cell towers at a certain time. The government views these large data repositories as the most efficient way to investigate crimes.
But is there any meaningful resistance from the sector?
Yes, there are two primary areas of resistance: transparency and encryption. Companies like Microsoft and Google have really led the way in publishing transparency reports that disclose the volume and nature of law enforcement data requests they receive.
And that puts political pressure on the government's use of them?
It does. Furthermore, many major platforms, Apple, Google, Meta, they emphasize their use of end-to-end encryption or default encryption, which makes the data technologically inaccessible without the user's key or passcode. This creates a technical hurdle that is often more robust than a legal one.
But we have to acknowledge the tension here.
We do. especially given the historical claims by whistleblowers like Edward Snowden, who alleged that some technology companies provided government agencies with direct server access for bulk surveillance programs. The reality is often a very fluid mix of cooperation, legal obligation, and strategic resistance.
So, moving from the constitutional theory of what the government can access to the concrete policy of what they must restrict, the U.S. government is actively creating new regulations to control where U.S. citizens' sensitive data goes globally. And the goal here is explicitly to counter foreign national security exploitation.
This is a major policy shift. It's being implemented through a new rule from the Department of Justice, which enacts Executive Order 14117.
And the rule is focused on addressing what the government defines as an unusual and extraordinary threat.
That's the language they use. And it's posed by countries of concern, which includes China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others, accessing massive amounts of commercially acquired U.S. data.
And what exactly is the risk they're trying to mitigate with this?
Hostile actors exploit this data, which is often derived from the advertising technology ecosystem, for highly targeted nefarious purposes. We're talking about sophisticated blackmail operations against high-level officials, identifying and targeting higher-risk government personnel for espionage.
And improving their own cyber targeting.
Significantly improving their cyber targeting capabilities.
Right.
If a hostile state knows the health status and financial weaknesses of a specific government employee, that employee becomes a prime target for coercion or infiltration.
So the rule is designed to stop transactions involving two key data categories: government-related data and bulk U.S.-sensitive personal data. Can you break down the regulatory response into the two levels of risk: prohibited versus restricted transactions?
Sure. Prohibited transactions represent the highest and most immediate national security risk, and they are categorically banned. This list is quite specific. It includes all forms of data brokerage transactions with these countries of concern, or COCCIs, or covered persons, CPs.
Okay.
And it also includes all transactions involving human omic data and human biospecimens.
So genetic and biological information.
Exactly. And the rationale for banning that is that once it's compromised, the damage is irrevocable. It could confer permanent strategic advantages to adversaries in biomedical research, or even targeted biological attacks.
And what about the restricted transactions? These aren't banned outright.
Correct. Restricted transactions are those that are prohibited unless the U.S. person complies with specific, rigorous security requirements that are set by CISA.
And these would be more common business agreements?
Yes, things like certain employment agreements with covered persons, or vendor agreements where data access is necessary for providing a service.
So the restricted transactions can go ahead if the risk is technically mitigated. What does that mitigation look like?
While the CISA security requirements, they set a pretty high bar for data security. The goal is to allow necessary commerce to continue while preventing the covered person from having direct access to the raw data.
So you anonymize it somehow.
It's achieved by mandating techniques like pseudonymization, robust de-identification, data aggregation, and high-level encryption. So, for example, if a U.S. company needs a COSI-owned vendor to process data, the U.S. company has to implement controls that ensure the data is never viewed or accessed in a fully identifying format by the vendor's personnel.
Let's focus on the scope of the rule. What exactly counts as sensitive personal data?
It's a very comprehensive definition. It covers what are called covered personal identifiers, like Social Security numbers or truncated government IDs, precise geolocation data, biometric data, human omic data, and personal health and financial data.
But there are carve-outs.
Yes. Importantly, the rule carves out exclusions for data that doesn't relate to an individual, like trade secrets, and also data that is already lawfully publicly available from government records or widely distributed media.
The idea of bulk is crucial here, as it sets the threshold for when the regulation even applies. So how did the Justice Department approach defining bulk?
Well, the DOJ recognized that data analysis leverages statistics. You don't need a billion records to understand a billion-person population. A large, well-structured sample provides critical, actionable insights.
So the thresholds are set pretty low.
They're set based on orders of magnitude above zero, ensuring that even relatively smaller, the statistically significant samples fall under the regulation. For instance, precise geolocation data, which is defined as location data measured within 1,000 meters, must involve location information for more than 1,000 U.S. devices to be considered bulk, sensitive data, unless it's already classified as government-related.
Okay, let's look at the entities being targeted, the covered persons. Who falls under this umbrella?
Covered person, or CP, is explicitly defined as a foreign person that falls into specific organizational categories. These include foreign entities that are 50% or more owned by a country of concern, those organized under COSI laws, or those whose principal place of business is located in a COSI.
What about foreign-owned companies operating right here in the U.S.? That seems like a highly sensitive point.
It is, and this is a critical distinction in the final rule. A U.S. subsidiary of a covered person is not automatically designated as a covered person itself.
Interesting.
They are treated as U.S. persons and are required to comply with the prohibitions, which means they cannot engage in prohibited transactions with their foreign parent company or other CPs. This status can only change if that U.S. subsidiary is individually designated as a CP by the Attorney General.
So reflect a more measured approach.
Yes, to avoid over-regulating domestic business activities that pose minimal risk.
Finally, compliance. How rigorously must U.S. companies police themselves to avoid violating this complex rule? What is the standard for enforcement?
The rule uses the knowingly standard, which has a very broad legal definition. It means the U.S. person had actual knowledge of a violation, or that they reasonably should have known about the violation.
And this is key because it introduces the doctrine of willful blindness.
It is?
So willful blindness is when a company deliberately ignores signs of a problem just to maintain plausible deniability.
Exactly. Imagine a U.S. company has a contract with a COSI vendor that explicitly prohibits the vendor from transferring the data to a third country. But the U.S. company receives multiple internal reports indicating the vendor is violating that contractual obligation and is sending the data to the COSI parent company.
Okay.
If the U.S. company decides to just ignore those reports and look the other way because it's cheaper than changing vendors, that U.S. entity should have known about the violation and is therefore liable.
Well, so how do you combat that?
To combat this, U.S. persons engaging in these restricted transactions must implement due diligence procedures and perform mandatory annual audits covering the preceding 12 months to proactively verify vendor identities and data flows. And we are now connecting all these dots to the intelligence community, specifically focusing on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, Section 702.
This is arguably the most valuable tool the intelligence community has.
It is. But it's also found by courts to be constitutional, yet it remains highly controversial because it constantly intersects with American civil liberties.
Okay, just to set the stage, what makes Section 702 deemed so highly valuable to the U.S. government?
Well, it provides near real-time insights that are deemed critical for countering terrorist plots before they can materialize. It's used for rapidly responding to cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, like the kind we were just discussing with Volt Typhoon, and for addressing threats posed by hostile nation-states like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
And it's used for more than that.
It is. Furthermore, it has been instrumental in combating the trafficking of fentanyl into the United States, which often involves foreign actors linked to drug cartels and international supply chains in places like China and Mexico.
And what is the mechanism? How does 702 actually operate compared to, say, traditional wiretapping?
702 targets non-U.S. persons who are located abroad. As of 2022, it targeted approximately 246,073 foreign individuals or entities.
And because the targets are foreign and overseas?
It operates without requiring the individualized judicial review or the probable cause standard that's required for traditional surveillance of U.S. citizens. The court simply authorizes the overall targeting procedures annually, not the individual targets themselves.
So how does the government actually collect the data under this authority?
There are two main, technically distinct collection methods. First is what's called downstream collection. This involves compelled collection from U.S. electronic communication service providers like email or social media companies of communications sent to or from the foreign target.
And the second?
The second is upstream collection, which involves gathering the target's communications as they transit the physical internet backbone within the United States with the compelled assistance of the backbone providers.
And it's important to note the abouts collection was suspended.
Yes, the highly problematic abouts collection, which was gathering communications about a foreign target that were neither to nor from the target, was suspended back in 2017 after it was found to scoop up way too much irrelevant U.S. person data.
But despite that foreign target requirement, U.S. citizens' communications still end up in the haystack, and that's where the privacy crisis really begins.
That is the core conflict. While the government stresses that 702 is not bulk collection, it is targeted. A substantial amount of U.S. person communications are acquired incidentally.
So if an American is talking to a foreign spy,
If an American citizen is communicating with a targeted foreign terrorist or spy, those communications are collected. The scope of this incidental collection is extensive, and critically, there are currently no reliable public metrics on the actual magnitude of how many Americans are affected. The government just has this huge, highly sensitive database.
so the government has this massive, legally collected haystack of foreign intelligence, which just happens to contain potentially millions of private communications involving Americans. And that leads us to the most controversial part of this whole thing, the query problem.
The practice of querying this collected data using U.S. person identifiers is the most serious privacy and civil liberties risk of the entire program. In general, government personnel, especially those at the FBI, do not need to show suspicion of criminal wrongdoing or probable cause to search the existing 702 database using a U.S. person's name or email address.
And many civil liberties experts consider the query itself to be a separate Fourth Amendment event.
They do. They argue that searching this massive trove of incidental communications constitutes an unreasonable search of that U.S. person's private life.
And the compliance record on this, particularly with the FBI, it has been abysmal, hasn't it?
That's putting it mildly. The FBI's reported compliance incidents regarding these U.S. person queries have been dramatically higher than those reported by the CIA or the National Counterterrorism Center. We're talking numbers in the thousands or tens of thousands of improper searches, depending on the year.
And the FISA court has called them out on this?
Repeatedly. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the FISC, has issued harsh findings, labeling the FBI's querying practices as substantial and persistent compliance problems.
Can you elaborate on the scale of these violations? Give us a couple of concrete examples.
Sure. One high-profile example involved a 2018 audit at an FBI field office where personnel conducted batch job queries totaling over 6,800 Social Security numbers against the Section 702 database.
Wow.
And often without appropriate justification or record-keeping. The sheer scale of that suggests a systemic disregard for the minimization procedures.
And there was another one after the protests in 2021.
Yes. Following civil unrest and protests in 2021, FBI agents conducted thousands of searches concerning individuals who were arrested in connection with those events. Hundreds of those searches were later found to be non-compliant with the existing rules because they were using 702 data to investigate domestic activities without satisfying the required foreign intelligence purpose.
Are there any internal mechanisms to prevent political misuse or these kinds of highly sensitive queries?
Yes. In response to these compliance failures, enhanced safeguards and elevated senior-level approval are now required for what are designated sensitive queries.
And that includes?
These include identifiers related to elected officials, political candidates, or members of the news media. It reflects an attempt to recognize and protect the heightened First Amendment interests associated with these groups.
So despite all these high-profile compliance failures, the government aggressively defends the necessity of these U.S. person queries. What is their core defense?
The arguments primarily revolve around two categories: victim identification and defensive use.
Okay.
Queries are essential to identify and immediately warn Americans who are being targeted by hostile state actors or cyber attacks. For example, the FBI might discover via 702 that Iranian hackers were researching a former head of a federal department. That allows the FBI to instantly notify that individual and take defensive steps to secure their accounts and protect them.
So without the query, the victim would be unaware.
Completely unaware.
And the second argument relates to preventing threats before they ever materialize through vetting.
Exactly. Queries are crucial for vetting non-U.S. visa applicants and U.S. persons who are applying for high-level security clearances. However, this is where we see the structural vetting gap.
What do you mean by that?
The current legal standard for running a query is that it must be reasonably likely to return foreign intelligence. If the government lacks a specific foreign intelligence reason to believe it will find information, even if it knows the data exists, it may not run the query.
So that means the government may already have critical information in the database.
Critical, unminimized information that it cannot legally access for crucial vetting purposes. It's a self-imposed paralysis, in a way.
It is.
And the intelligence community argues forcefully that requiring a probable cause standard, so requiring a warrant based on suspicion of a crime for FBI queries, would effectively paralyze urgent national security investigations.
They point back to 9/11.
They point back to the major intelligence failures identified after 9/11, where there was this wall that prevented the intelligence community from connecting dots between foreign threats and actors operating domestically. Requiring probable cause, they argue, would recreate that dangerous wall, preventing them from operating with the speed they need to protect victims or stop incoming threats. We've covered massive ground today. We've synthesized sources on threats, ranging from nation-state grid infiltration and the universal looming threat of quantum computing Q-Day, all the way to the commercial exploitation of personal data that necessitated that new Doomsday rule.
And crucially, we've examined the internal mechanisms of intelligence, focusing on FISA Section 702, which exists in this constant state of tension.
It's always trying to balance its immense security value against the severe recurring privacy risks it poses to U.S. citizens.
The central tension we just keep returning to, whether we're discussing Chinese hackers or the FBI's data access, it's constant. The centralized systems that underpin modern life centralized data flows, our mobile devices, the global internet backbone, they are simultaneously irresistible targets for foreign adversaries and absolutely essential tools for government protection. And being well-informed in this modern era, it means understanding not just what the threats are, but how the law and policy are struggling, really struggling, to keep pace with this complex technological reality. We discussed that under the new DOJ rule, the government considers a U.S. company that fails to investigate foreign contractual violations to be willfully blind, meaning they are liable because they reasonably should have known about the violation.
Right.
So given the immense pervasive reach of data brokers, the use of incidental collection by intelligence agencies, and just the ubiquity of tracking technology, what level of due diligence should you, as a private citizen, adopt regarding the data you generate every single day?
Yeah.
That is the final essential question we want to leave you with today.